I'm Julian Plaster. I'm World War II veteran.
Hi, I'm Luke Gehringer.
I'm Josh Galermo.
I'm Harrison Roloff, and today's May 19th, 2019. We're here interviewing Mr. Julian Plaster about his life experience.
All right, Mr. Plaster, where and when were you born?
I was born September 9th, 1923 in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Can you describe your family life as a child?
Well, it was kind of rough, but I had a brother and a sister, and we lived with my grandparents, and there was always babies around because my grandmother was a midwife, and she would take in these unmarried mothers and then deliver the baby and then take care of the babies. And it was always full of house. The house was always full of people.
And were you close with your siblings?
I was close to my sister. My brother was 8 years younger than I am. I really never got to know my brother until after the war, because there was too many years difference between us. And I told him, I said, Bob, I missed out on knowing you when you were young because I was always working.
Yeah, and you worked a lot as a child, so
Yeah.
What did your parents do for a living?
I don't know what my dad did, a lot of different jobs. My mother, the same thing, took whatever job she could get. Most of the time, my mother and father were separated. That's why we were living with my grandparents. And so I really never got to know my dad that well.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Virginia, Minnesota. That's about 60 miles north of Duluth, and that's about 60 miles south of the Canadian border.
And what were some of your favorite activities and hobbies growing up?
When I was growing up, well, there was 4-H Club was one of them, and
What does that mean?
well, that means well, it's like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, but it was the farm. They taught you. Well, I'd learned how to cook when I was in the 4-H Club.
And does 4-H means hands, health, head, and heart?
Yeah, I pledged my head to greater service, my heart to greater loyalty, my mind to better, my health to better living for my country.
So that had an early impact. That had a big impact on your early life.
Pardon.
And as you said, you worked a lot as a child. What were some of the jobs you did?
Well, I worked as a paper boy, and then I was also working in a grocery store. I'd go in there and take care of the vegetables and things like that. And I also worked cleaning a restaurant. I'd get up at 3:30 in the morning and go in there and scrub the floors and clean it up, and then help out in the cooking. And then at 8:30 I'd go to school.
And did this conflict with your other lives and other activities and hobbies? Did you have time to play sports and stuff?
Well, I was playing hockey, and well, coming from a small town, you know, they didn't have that many boys for the sports, so you had to take out everything, whether it was broom ball, curling, hockey, basketball, whatever it was. Baseball, we didn't have any baseball teams up there. Too cold, 40 below zero. But curling was a nice sport that I had, and broom ball.
And what is broom ball?
It's you play at a size of a football field. You got a ball, a volleyball, and you hit it with a broom. It's like hockey, but you use a broom and a ball, and it's a very dangerous sport because you miss that ball and you hit somebody in the head with that broom.
And what grade school did you attend in Virginia, Minnesota?
Pardon? What grade? I went to 11th grade.
What grade school, Mr. Plaster?
Oh, I went to Lincoln grade school.
And did religion play a significant role in your childhood?
Well, I was Presbyterian church, and I was confirmed there. But my religion is, I believe in God, and that's the main thing.
And was there anyone in specific that impacted your religion a big role?
Well, I think I'd have to say Miss Fleer. She was a wonderful teacher, and she took 7 of us boys. I remember Billy Sovey was one of them, and were kind of rough. They're about ready to throw us out of the church, but she had patience, and she'd have us over to her house once in a while, and she treated us real nice, and we learned a great deal. We learned how to pray. I can remember the first time she told us to kneel down. There was a lot of giggling going on, and then after a while, after a couple of weeks of that, there was no more giggling. We were learning how to pray.
Nice. And do you have any other significant events that occurred to you as a child?
Well, sure. The first one I think was my sister and I were very close, and so we got up real early one day, and we were going to go to visit my uncle who lived in Milwaukee, and we were traveling north, and he was south. So the worst part about that was the night before we left, there was a truck that was stolen, and so they thought that had something to do with my sister and I missing that day. And we ended up in what they called a Hoover camp at that time. It was men that was circling the country looking for jobs, and they would set up in the Hoover camp. And so we ended up there, and the guy asked me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, there's too many kids in the house, so we gotta leave." He says, "Well, who are you living with?" I says, "With my grandfather, Mr. Hayward." Well, my grandfather and grandmother used to once a week cook up a big pot of stew for these guys and serve it at the library. So they knew my grandfather, so they took us back home. And but it was a 3-state alarm because they thought that we had been kidnapped. And we didn't get a licking that time. My grandfather says, "No, we're just glad to have you back." And one other time, I was out hunting with my buddy, Jack Voss, and we each had a .22, and his dad was a policeman, and Jack's father told us how to handle a gun and all the safety thing about it. And so after hunting, well, we were squatting down there to go to the bathroom, and Jack pulled out his dad's .32 revolver. He pointed it right at me. He said, "Be too bad if I shot that off." I says, "Yeah, it would be." I says, "Don't fool around. It might be loaded." He says, "It's not loaded." They pulled the trigger, hit me in there, came out down there, and they cut it out of my leg. And then he says, "Well, stay here. I'm a Boy Scout. I'll take care of you." I said, No. I flagged a farmer, and he took me into the hospital.
And did you attend high school in Virginia, Minnesota?
Yes, I went to 11th grade, and that summer I got a job at the railroad, and I was making $90 a month. That was big money at that time. And so when September come, my mother said, "You better keep the job because we need." So I didn't finish. I didn't graduate, and I kept that job there, and that job lasted until I think it was about the last of November, and then I got a job in the lumber camp as a cook's helper.
And what high school did you attend?
I went to Roosevelt High School.
And did you ever end up graduating?
I never graduated from the high school up there. I graduated after I went in the service and I come back home. I went to adult school, and I graduated in '56. So I was 33 years old when I graduated from high school.
And when Pearl Harbor occurred, where were you? What happened? What was it like?
Pearl Harbor happened, but I was up in the lumber camp, and I didn't know anything about it. None of us did. We didn't have a radio. We didn't have a phone or nothing. And the job was done in February, and that's when he came back downtown, and that's when we heard about Pearl Harbor, almost 2-3 months after Pearl Harbor.
All right, and what was your feeling when you first heard of Pearl Harbor? What was the shock like?
Well, we were shocked. I mean, how could this happen? Because we hadn't heard anything before. We weren't prepared for it. And some of the fellows that I was standing with, they right away rushed in and enlisted in the Army.
And did you feel compelled to enlist at all? I mean, is that what drove you to it?
Well, I felt bad, but I was sitting there talking with my mother, and I had to find a job. That was the main thing, to support the family.
And what was your motivation to end up joining the Navy and the war?
Well, I think my whole family was involved in service. One of my relatives fought in the Revolutionary War, and then I had two great-grandfathers in the Civil War, and so there was motivation to protect what we had.
And you ended up joining the Navy as a cook, correct?
Well, I joined the Navy. I didn't join up as a cook. I just joined the Navy. I didn't know what job I was going to get. But I did join the Navy because I wanted a nice, clean bed. I thought I'd get on board ship. And I was fooled. I was ended up in a foxhole.
And when did you start serving in the war?
I went in 1942. It was I think it was about December 11th or something that I was shipped to Farragut, Idaho.
And what division did you serve in?
What division? Well, there was no division at that time. I just went in the Navy there, and from there, many of us had rheumatic fever, so we were shipped down to California after we graduated from the boot camp, and we weren't assigned anything. I was assigned as a cook. There was 160 of us in Camp Waldron. I was in 161 was their camp number, and so they took a percentage of us and put us in as cooks, and any percentage of us put another group and so forth. So I ended up as a cook, and I went to Cooks and Bakers School up there.
And that played well with you because the 4-H club taught you cooking.
I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think they had 161 guys here. All right, so many were going to go here, so many was going to go there.
All right. And what did the role of a cook, like what did the details entail?
Pardon?
What was the role of a cook in the Navy? What were your...
Well, cook. Hey, one thing we weren't taught in the Cooks and Bakers School. We weren't taught how to cook on a fire or with very very little supplies. We had everything there, and we got on an island, and we had a little stove, and we had to make things do with what we had there, and we had never been taught that, so we had to learn.
And even though your role, you were assigned as a cook, other details were entailed, correct?
Well, when I was assigned at Hawaii, they assigned us to Cashew 20, and then we got on board the troop transport there, and that's when we knew we had other duties besides. When I was on board ship, there was another instance on there where I almost got killed. I was sitting in one of the compartments there. We were playing cards. A lot of guys were in there, and I was just leaning, playing cards. And while I was doing that, some guy in the corner was playing with a .45, and they warned him, you don't play with a gun like that in a confined area. And so I just happened to reach up for the dice, and the gun went off, hit the stool on the other side of the table, bounced up, and it was so hot in there that we didn't have no shirts on. And I reached for my side, and all I could see was blood and wood. And that .45 hit the bulkhead, and one of the fellows peeled it off the jacket, and I got that as a souvenir. So, and that's all. No damage done, just some slivers.
And going back to Farragut, Idaho, you were talking about a sickness. What happened there?
Well, we had rheumatic fever, so we spent a couple of weeks in the hospital recovering from that. It's a thickening of the blood, and they got what they call a sedimentation rate, and they check their blood every day, and I think those of us that had it were shipped down to Pleasanton, California. I think we were supposed to recuperate, and from what I heard, we weren't supposed to go overseas because of that. They felt that it had something to do with the heart.
And what did you do in Pleasanton?
Not too much of anything. Just, I mean, we had no duties to do. I was in charge of one of the barracks, and I'd have to sign different guys for shore patrol duty. But we weren't going in any training. We were just loafing around.
Oh, really? And after Pleasanton, you were then shipped to Shoemaker, California, and Alameda.
Yeah, we went Alameda and Shoemaker. They were just about the same thing as Pleasanton, California. We're just assigned to a barrack, and the only time that we got into the service, into a unit, was when they shipped us to Hawaii, and that's when we were assigned to Cashew 20.
And right before Hawaii, in California, how long were you at these places for, cumulatively?
Well, February 2nd is when I went to Roy Namur, and so it was about 6 or 7 months at least that we were moving around California.
Oh, wow, okay.
What was nice about there is, what was bad was they lost our records. I think that's one reason why a lot of us that had rheumatic fever were shipped out, because we weren't supposed to, but we weren't getting paid either. So we'd go into the different canneries in California, and we'd work that day, and they'd pay us cash that day, and they'd give us a meal besides. And the people in California was real nice. We'd come out of our camp, and we'd hitchhike, and we always got a ride. They'd pick up a sailor and take him wherever you wanted to go.
And when you did finally make it to the naval station in Hawaii, and this is where your training first began, this is when you first started, what was the training like?
Well, first when we got to Hawaii, many of us was assigned to help out in the hospitals. And so we would help out there, and then we were training how to jump into water, how to climb down the nets, and but at no time were we ever instructed on how to handle a gun. That was amazing to me. And the first time I got a gun is when I was coming off the troop transport, and I was getting ready to climb down the net, and I was handed a carbine.
And obviously everyone was scared going to the war, but what was the feeling of feeling unprepared? Is that an accurate assessment on going into the war?
To be honest with you, I can't remember what I felt. I think we talked about that, some of my buddies, and we didn't know what we were going to get into, and it's the unknown.
And how close were you with all your buddies and fellow comrades?
Well, the three of them, I was Jack Bogan and Bob Sears and Carl Yadis. I hung around with them very close. They hung around with me because they used to call me a CB when I was because I used to scrounge around and get stuff and help the tent, build our tent up, build a table and things like that. And Carl Yadis and Bob Sears, they depended on me quite a bit. When it comes to fear, everybody has a different reaction. And I know on this one instance, on February 2nd when we got there, they were afraid. Everybody was afraid. I was afraid too. Some of the guys especially during the drumming. They lose all their facilities. They wet their pants. They go everything. It's just.
And your buddies were scared as well. So how did they rely on you in that sense?
Well, they were. Carl Yadis was petrified at what was going on, but I tried to make it easy for him, and I did things around there. I remember February 12th when the Japanese came back and bombed us. I got to the foxhole, and my two buddies had forgot to get their helmets, so I had to rush back and get their helmet. And when I got their helmets and I was coming out of the tent, and I wasn't more than 20 or 30 feet out when the concussion from the bomb blew me back into the tent, but I wasn't a scratch on me from it.
And that was at Roy Namor?
Yeah.
All right. And did you keep in touch with any of your buddies, war buddies?
Yes, I did.
After the war?
We kept in touch after the war. Jack Bogan and I kept in touch. And when he called me when we were going to start a reunion. And he says, Julian? I says, yeah, Jack. He said, well, how you know it's me? I says, hey, Jack, I spent 3 years with you in a tent. I know your voice. So there was about 40 of us that would meet, and we met for around 25 years. We had different reunions.
And Roy Namor Island is in Marshall Islands, correct? So that's when you first started seeing the war and the effects, and is that when you as a cook started having to go around the island and assess it to look for the Japanese and control it, the island?
Well, the island was very small, and it's flat. And the only place that these Japanese could hide was in the gutters along the airstrip. And don't ask me if I ever killed anybody or if I saw any of them on Roy and Namor Island. The only ones that I saw was the ones I buried. I was on a burial. When I landed on Roy and Namor Island, as I got off of the landing craft, I was instructed to, with a pair of gloves, start burying the dead. And that was my first job.
And Roy Namor Island had prisoners of war, and how would you say the treatment of the Japanese prisoners was?
Well, the thing is, we didn't have prisoners. We had one prisoner on Roy and Namor Islands, and all these islands that we went on, the Japanese weren't going to surrender. They'd rather die than surrender. So we never had prisoners, but they kept that one prisoner alive because they wanted to talk to him about it.
And how close were you to the front lines of all the battles and the fighting going on?
How close was I?
Besides, I mean, I know you talked about the bombing when Japan flew over and dropped the bomb, but do you have any frame of reference of what it was like and feelings and thoughts?
Well, when I learned as far as about war, the night that the Japanese come back to bomb us, we could look up there and our spotlights was focused on these bombers, and we could see the bomb bay doors open and we could see the bombs coming down. And you just sit there and you hope that it's not one of yours.
And the Soviet Union actually joined our cause in the Pacific where you were. What's your thoughts on that, of their involvement?
Of my involvement in there?
Of the Soviet Union's involvement.
Well, when I was on Tinian Island, we had to go down there and get supplies. And what ticked me off mostly was we were unloading fresh meat or frozen meat from our ship, and we're loading it on to the Russian ships. And we weren't getting any of the meat, except we would try to sneak once in a while.
And how did your religion play a role in this during your time at war? Did it help guide you through it?
Well, my religion stayed with me. I believed in the Holy Spirit, and I never lost my religion. I always had faith in God.
And going back, sorry for jumping around, but going back to the Soviet Union, did you actually talked to some of the, or met some of the Soviet Union soldiers?
No,
You're just giving it to their ships, the meat?
I never met any of them. We would unload from our ship, and we'd load onto pallets, and then they would load it onto the Russian ships.
And while serving in the Pacific, what was your knowledge about the Nazis and what was going on in Europe?
Well, I learned more from my one history teacher, Anderson. He was keeping us updated on what was going on over there.
And where were you when you heard the news that the war had ended? And what was the feeling like?
Gee, whoopee! I was in my hometown, and my mother and I, we drove up to my hometown, and the fire chief invited my mother and I over for dinner, and that's when we heard over the radio that the Japanese had surrendered. That was in July of 1945.
And when did you get transported back?
Pardon?
When did you get transported back to America?
That was in July. I think about the first part of July. There was about 19 of us that was shipped. When I was on Tinian, we were all issued winter clothing, so we knew that we were going to invade Japan. And then all of a sudden, in July, it wasn't July, it was, I think I got a record of when, but we hit Portland, Oregon, and there was 19 of us on that ship. Took us about 23 days to go from Tinian to Portland, Oregon, and then from there, the Navy told us that we could go on leave. And so I went to my hometown right away. I went to Milwaukee right away, and then my mother and my girlfriend and I, we drove up to my hometown.
Why did you go to Milwaukee?
Well, I was living there in Milwaukee. My mother was living in Milwaukee. She moved down to Milwaukee, and my mother was working in very strange. World War I, my mother did a man's job. She worked at a sawmill. World War II, she worked as a chipper and a grinder doing a man's job at harness figure.
And when you did come home, there must have been a sense of relief on the boat ride home, correct?
Yeah. Well, the first thing my mother asked me, did you have a tattoo? I says, no tattoos.
So even then you were still a little scared of your mom.
All right, and then transitioning to after the war, what jobs, did you go back to school? What jobs did you get after the war?
Well, after the war, I went back to Ellis Chalmers, but then Ellis Chalmers had a big strike at that time, so we were out of work. So then I started working for a Nash Kelvinator. And then Nash Kelvinator, I worked at a couple other jobs, but I went to school, and then I went to Milwaukee School of Engineering. Then I got my first job in supervision at Lakeside Manufacturing Company. And I worked at John Olster's for a while in production control. And I worked quite a few jobs, different jobs. When I first started Milwaukee School of Engineering, the professor says if you can keep your job as an industrial engineer 5 years, you're very lucky. And I couldn't figure out why, and I found out. You'd go in there, you simplify their methods, save them money, put a new system in there, and once it got going, then out you went. And then you'd get somebody else in there with some more ideas. And it it was bad for me because I had 3 or 4 different jobs. One place called me back the second time because they were building a new plant and they wanted me to lay it out for them, and I went back. And Lakeside Manufacturing Company, they called me back too, but they would never combine the times. So when I got ready to retire, I had no pension coming from any place. In fact, my last job, 13 years, I was a security guard at the bank.
And did you teach at a Sunday school?
Yes, I taught Sunday school when I first came back from the service, and at my wife's church. That's the one we got married in, Evangelical Church it was. And Evangelical Church was a German church. There were 2 of them that were founded in Pennsylvania, Evangelical United Brethren, and they merged. They merged in about 1947 or 48, and they became the EUB Church, and that was the church on North Astor Street. And the minister that founded this church here during World War I, Reverend Julian, he founded 3 churches in this area, and he left the Catholic Church over in Rome because he wanted people to have a right to read the Bible. And back then, in World War I, they felt that people didn't have the knowledge to read the Bible and to interpret. And so I joined my wife's church before I went in the service. Reverend Wolf was the minister at the time. And so when I come back, I start teaching little grades. And my last teaching was, for about 7 years, I taught adult Bible study class, and I enjoyed that. And what I enjoyed most is I would take stories from the Bible and I'd make plays out of them, and the kids enjoyed that, taking parts in it.
And how long did you teach at that Sunday school?
Well, when I first started in 1945, and I taught Sunday school almost 50 years.
It's a long time.
Did you decide to teach Sunday school because of your close relationship with Mrs. Flair, your Sunday school teacher?
I probably, because I thought there was a job, and when you're a member of a church, you got a job to do to help the church, and I used to pick up kids and bring them to Sunday school. In fact, my brother married Jenny, and I used to pick her up and bring her to Sunday school, and she didn't even know I had a brother. And then they met in youth fellowship in church, and she says, Plaster, my Sunday school teacher is Plaster. And he says, yeah, that's my brother.
And what made you want to keep coming back to teach Sunday school for 50 years?
I keep going back because I enjoyed the questions that they asked me. I approached it this way. I told the kids and I told adults that this is the Holy Bible. It contains the Word of God, but it was written by man. And man was inspired by God to write this. There's a lot of things in there that we got to define, but I used to enjoy, especially the adults. They asked a lot of questions, and I used to research and find the answers for them.
And that was your favorite part about teaching
Pardon?
Sunday school? That was your favorite part? That was your favorite part about teaching Sunday school?
Yeah.
Could you describe the plays that you held? The plays that you used to teach the kids?
I still don't understand you.
You and the children, you would put up plays for the people to watch and enjoy.
Yeah.
Could you describe what they were like?
Well, I wrote them. I wrote the story of Moses, and that we used. And our church used to meet summer camp, and I put on the play that day. There was 13 members of that play, and after the play, one old man got up to me and he says, I heard the story of Moses all my life, but the first time I understood it, because it had different characters in there.
That must have felt great.
Yeah.
Transitioning to family life, did you raise a family after the war?
I got married, and we had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And my son died when he was 15 of cancer, and he was a good kid. He wrote a 3-minute sermon and gave it in front of the church. He only lived about 1 year after we found out, but he had a nice attitude. He was very good in sports. He was all city in baseball, and he loved football. In fact, he said he loved football better than baseball, and I said, why? He said, well, in baseball, you're out there all by yourself. You make a mistake, everybody can see you. He says, football, he says, you're in there. But he had a tumor in his hip, and Ted Kennedy's son had a similar, but his tumor was lower, and they cut his leg off. Ted Kennedy's son he's in Congress right now, but he's got one leg. And I told my son that we might have to take your one leg off. He said, well, I still got one leg. That was his attitude.
That must have been great to hear.
Yeah.
Process. How soon did you get married after the war?
Pardon?
How soon did you get married after the war?
I come back in December of 45, and 46 in April I got married, about 5 months after.
And now after your children, now today, you have grandchildren?
I got one granddaughter, and I got 3 great-grandkids. One is 24, one is 21, and one is 19. And the one that's 19, he goes to Stevens Point, and he's going to become a nurse. My great-granddaughter, she is in the Army Reserve, and the 30th of this month, she's going to be going to Waupun for school. She's going to become, I think, a prison guard or a consular or something.
And what were some of the values you taught your growing family as they grew bigger and bigger?
Pardon?
What were some of the values you taught your family?
Family. Love your family. I think my wife's family was very influential about that. We're very close. You do things with your family. My brother and I are very, very close. And he had 3 boys. And at one time, one lived in Minneapolis, one lived in Milwaukee, one lived in Chicago. And periodically they would meet. And I says, hey, that's pretty nice, you know. He said, well, we learned it from you and Dad. You two were very close together. And we were. My brother and I, we did things together. We'd go up and visit my mother and help her out. We'd visit my sister that lived in Berlin, Wisconsin. And just family values. I think one thing I taught my kids is not to be discriminated against anyone. And I think the way I raised my son, he used to say, well, Mom, I'm going to have lunch with my buddy. So my wife would make an extra sandwich for him. And I never met his buddy. I didn't know who he was or anything until the day of the funeral. And this kid come up, he introduced himself, and this is my son's friend, and he was a black kid. But my son never felt that it was necessary to tell me about it.
And moving on to big events that shaped the time periods, like the presidents of President Eisenhower and Kennedy. What were your thoughts on those two?
Well, Eisenhower, to me, he was very intelligent, very smart. I think he had some very good ideas. And he made a comment that we've got to be very careful that we don't turn our country over to companies that are making our military supplies, because they're going to control it. Kennedy had some wonderful ideas, and he pushed for the space program. I think he was a good speaker, but he had to me, he had some wonderful ideas.
And what's your thoughts on the space program in the space race? Did you?
I thought it was a good idea. I mean, find out what's out there, but hey, how far are we going to go now? I mean, they want to go to Mars. They're going to go. By the time the guy gets to Mars, he's going to be 100 years old. I think the space program. I think they've gone as far as they should go. I don't think there's any more to be learned. We were created by God, and we were created perfect, and we keep abusing it. I think God gave us a perfect world, and we're abusing that. That's my feelings.
So you think today, man's human race is not destined to go beyond the Earth? You think we should and take care of what we have now? And
I think you said it right. I think take care of what we got, and build upon that. We're out there searching for something that maybe we'll never find. It's like having a dream when you're a little kid. You know, a dream about being a big shot, and worry about what you got. Build on what you got here.
And when the Soviet Union released Sputnik, the satellite, what was your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought it was a nice thing for human beings to sure, it was Russia, but it still didn't make any difference to me. It was something that was accomplished, and it showed that here we as human beings had brains to create something like that.
So you felt no fear that the Soviet Union's achieved this
No,
power.
at the time, no.
And so then America did end up getting a man first on the moon. There must have been a patriotic sense that overcame you, correct?
Yeah. I think when we landed a man on the moon, I think, well, it's like any game, I guess. You're in, you want to be first. You want to be the best. And I think Kennedy pointed out he wanted us to be the first ones to do things. I don't know what you accomplished by being first in that, but I think a great deal was learned by going out in space, as far as medicine and upon our body, what our body can do and can't do, and there was a big benefit from that.
Did you think that America being first and showing its superpower and to the rest of the world, that it was a powerful symbol against this communist Russia, Soviet Union?
I think we got other ways to show the world that we're a powerful nation, and that's showing love. And when we accept people, I mean, our country is very small. I mean, very young. We're only 250 years old or something like that, and compared to other nations. But you know, you look at some of these great kingdoms. None of them was ever destroyed from the outside. It was always destroyed from the inside, through our morals.
And do you see that wavering today?
Yeah.
And going back to the tensions with the Soviet Union, what were the tensions like with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and how did they affect you, and what were your thoughts? Because you said it yourself, you wanted to show love. So what were your thoughts with that?
Well, it nothing affected me in the Cold War. I just I couldn't. I felt bad for the people that were like over in Germany, the East and the West. It was separated. Families were separated there, and I never did trust Russia. I think, hey, Korean War, we're still fighting the Chinese and the Russians there, and today I don't trust them. I think the idea that they have, I think if some of the small towns here, like my hometown, the Oliver Mining Company controlled it, and they told you just about everything. You had to live in their house, you had to buy from their store, and the Communist Party almost got a footing in that because of that.
And going back to space race against the Soviet Union, Kennedy was the one who inspired all this. He was the one who started it all. But he never lived to see it fully achieved. So what was it like when he was assassinated? What did you think? What were your thoughts, especially as a veteran?
I felt real bad, really. And it's like you lost a family member. And I don't think it was conspiracy. I watched a program, and a couple of programs on the shooting of Kennedy, and that's kids outside there. And the latest theory, and they got proof, but nobody will admit it. He was shot by one of his security men.
Going back to the tensions with the Soviet Union, and the space race was kind of an aspect of that. Kennedy inspired everyone for the space race. He was the one who encouraged us all.
Yeah.
But he never lived to see it fulfilled.
Right.
What were your thoughts when Kennedy was assassinated? And
I felt terrible. I was very upset. I mean, at the time, we were wondering who could possibly kill this man. I mean, he was a very lovable man. Well, they say that Oswald, but the gun that Oswald shot with could not create the damage that was done to Kennedy's back head. That took a high-power rifle, and the only rifle that he had was one his Secret Service men, and they they feel that this one guy. He fell back in his car and he had his gun cocked, and they all say that they could smell the smoke from a rifle there, and Oswald could not. Oswald shot from up here. Kennedy was hit from this way, from the front. Oswald's gun couldn't make a curve around and come in that way.
do you think it was an accident?
Yes.
All right. And continuing on in the 60s, the civil rights occurred with Martin Luther King. And what were your thoughts on the civil rights?
Well, for the longest time, I thought everybody has equal rights. Women, black, whoever you are, it shouldn't bother you. I look at Mahatma Gandhi in India. This guy used love and used non-violence, and I think the blacks, for too many years, even women didn't have their rights until a few years back. So I think it was about time that they did something.
And what was Martin Luther King Jr. was also assassinated. How did you feel about that? And
Well, I felt it was bound to happen because we do have a lot of people that got a lot of hatred in their hearts. Even today, there are people that they frown upon certain individuals. They even frown upon certain neighborhoods that you live in. I've heard people say, well, how can you live on the north side there? How can you live in that community where you got blacks living with you? I got a black fellow up there, Stan. 3 times I had to go to the emergency hospital. I called him. He says, I'll be right down. No questions asked. And I got one next door, Jackson. He saw me one day with a light jacket on. It was wintertime. And the next day he come in with an overcoat for me. He bought an overcoat for me. And I remember the woman that lived here, she was black, and she used to holler at me all the time. She says, "Julian, I'm going to the store." And she says, "I don't want to see you in that store taking a bus to get your groceries." And she was black. I see, I keep telling my family, and I keep telling everybody else, I got nice neighbors.
And with the assassination of Kennedy and assassination of MLK, these two men who had so much power and like love going with them, when they were killed, do you think the country transitioned to a country of what ifs? What if they like lived, and how much better we could have been?
I don't think it's going to change much until we, as human beings, we start learning to respect each other. And when I go to schools and I tell them, I says, whether it's sports, politics, religion, I says, we're all going to be different, but we have to learn to respect for what that person believes in.
And moving on into the 70s, Nixon came to power, and then he was discovered. His scandal was discovered with the Watergate scandal. What were your thoughts on that, and what's your input and feelings?
You want my honest thought about all these politicians? I don't trust any one of them. To me, they lie to you, and then they say, what irritates me most is they'll stand there and they'll lie, and you know they're lying, and to think that he actually believes that I'm going to believe him? No.
Oh, they think you're angered by the thought that they think you're that dull with it.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, the mobile phone also came out. What was that like when
The what?
the mobile phone first came out?
Oh, well, I thought that was going to be a big relief for some people. Like here now, we got in order for somebody to get in here, we got a push button out there. But that's only if you got a phone here. With my phone, it won't work. And I see too many adults using that phone when they're driving, and to me, it's dangerous.
All right. And moving on to another decade, the 80s. What was it like when the Explorer Challenger exploded with the teacher?
The what?
The teacher in the Explorer Challenger?
Well, he died. She died, but to me, I think if she'd been, if you were to ask her today, I think she would say, "I'm glad I went."
So you don't think she would have any regrets?
Yeah, I think she would have went back again.
And due to the circumstance that it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and
yeah,
and the risk was potential. You know, there was always that risk. So
I agree with you on that.
And then moving on to the 90s, the World Wide Web came out, the internet came out. What was your thoughts on that?
I didn't like it because I think it's taken the ability for us to use our own brain. I've got my encyclopedias, and when I'm searching for something, I can look. Now they just pull it all up there and find out. I know my daughter can answer the question in 20 seconds. But what is it going to do? Is it going to develop our brain, or is it going to hinder us from developing our brain and our ability to search and define?
And so, although it's beneficial, you see that it's hindering us, that we're becoming dependent onto it.
Right.
Okay, I understand.
It's another crutch.
Yeah, mother crutch.
Yeah.
And also in the 90s, in 99, December 31st, that's the last day of the whole millennium. And then we went on to 2000. What was that like?
Well, I just sat there and I listened to a lot of other people that were saying, this is going to happen when 2000 happened. This is going to happen. The end of the world is going to come here, you know. And I just sit back and I listen to it.
And a year later, on September 11th, 2001, 9/11 occurred. Obviously, your feelings towards it would be negative and you felt terrible for the people. But where were you, and just give me some insight on your perspective of it.
I can't tell you because I don't remember, but I think it was terrible. I think, to me, all these wars that we got over there in the East were creating more enemies than we're creating friends. Because every time you kill one of them, there's a family of maybe 20 that's going to hate you for this. Again, we got to be able to sit down and talk intelligent. I don't care who the other guy is. It could be ISIS or whatever it is. Let's try and communicate with these people. The Muslims are having a tough time, and people have often asked me about my religion. My religion is I believe in God. And then they say, well, you got the Muslims and you got this and this. And I says, yeah, you got them all. But I says, they're all taking a path and they're all going to God. It's just that they're taking a different path than you. But just respect that person for what he's doing and what he believes in.
So then what are your thoughts on the war on terror nowadays in the Middle East?
I have no answer for it except that, hey, we're going to have to learn to try to communicate. We're showing violence to them. We're trying to solve it by force, and I don't think we're going to accomplish anything by that.
And nowadays, America's turning the path away from like human soldiers and fighters, and we're going towards like drones and other robotic machines to fight. What are your thoughts on that? Are they beneficial or?
Well, I think I mentioned something before about the war. I don't think the wars that we're going to see in the future are going to be anything like we had now or what we had past. I think we should spend a little bit more of that money educating the people and to try and put across love and understanding for all people, for all races, for all countries.
And keeping on today's present talk, what do you think about the future of this country and the direction it's headed? Is it positive?
I think we better wake up to the fact that Russia and China, maybe some of these other countries, are trying to interfere and try to brainwash us. I think we're losing, to me, I always said we're losing our young people because churches are losing membership. I think people are learning, they're feeling that there isn't God, that, hey, why is God allowing all this? God gave us our choice to decide things, and we're going to have to learn from that.
So it's a scary path we're headed.
Pardon?
Would you say it's a scary path we're headed, and a scary path we're headed?
I still don't understand. I'm sorry.
No, you're completely fine. We're headed down a road that you don't like seeing.
No, I don't like to see it. I think the countries that we're invading, for what reason? We're killing off our young people. We're not creating friendship. We're creating more enemies, and that's going to affect us in this country here because we got relatives here, they got relatives over there.
And you don't like what's going on with the young generation today, with the millennials, not only is technology becoming more prevalent, but there's a lack of religion nowadays. You would say,
yeah.
And especially in America's political climate, there's such a divide amongst the young, and people are choosing hate over love. And what do you think about all this?
I think we're looking at, just another shooting in a high school yesterday. I think we should put a limitation on guns, for one thing. I think they're too easy. We used to have an argument before. You'd have a fist fight, and that was it. You call it over. And nowadays, you never know. They're going to guy's going to pull a knife or a gun on you. I think because of the scandal that the Roman Catholic Church was going through, I think that has hurt a great deal. I think we can clean that up, and people realize that we're still human beings, and we're all capable of making mistakes and of sinning. But I don't know. I'll tell you what. I'm glad I'm at the age I'm at now, because I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Oh, wow. And with presidents, former like Obama and now Trump, there is a huge divide with policies and fighting and beliefs on what should be done with this country. And what are your thoughts on this whole political climate today? Do you think...
Well, can you shut that up? Because I want to use some foul language. To me, I think right now, I respect the office of presidency, but I think Trump is an insult to our country, insult to the presidency. And I think Obama probably had some good ideas, but he couldn't get anything done. And some people say, well, he was only elected because he was black, and they wanted to show the world that they could elect a black. No, Obama's very smart. He's very intelligent. And as far as a woman being president, women have the same ability as we do. They got brains. They can make decisions. But I think, to me, Trump is like a spoiled kid. He inherited a lot of money, and he didn't know how to handle it. He had a lot of businesses that went bankrupt, and he got away with it because he had millions, and something that you and I probably would end up in jail. But I think that's wrong. I think, well, Joe Dimmer says, no matter what you talk about, the bottom line is dollars.
I just want to see your thoughts on due to this divide, and since it really is scary times out there. So I just wanted to understand, since you've lived through it all, you lived through the 30s all the way till today. What are I just wanted to understand your thoughts, because I feel like today's political climate today has never been seen before. Is that fair to say?
I think it's worse today. The way the division of our country, I don't like it. I think to answer your question, I don't know the whole question, but I don't like the division. But to me, that division shows that. Well, I remember meeting a guy from Alabama, and this is just about 10 years ago. He says, my allegiance is to the sovereign state of Alabama, then to the Confederate state, and then to the United States. There are still people that believe that. So we have a division in our country today, where one side believes that, hey, we get what we want by being a bully to the rest of the world. And that ain't what we started. This country started with love, accepting people in there, and I think we've lost that.
But do you still believe America's the greatest country in the world?
Yes, I do. You know why? This is the only country in the world that has as many different nationalities, different religious groups, and different political groups as we have here, and we're still existing.
And even though there is this divide, could you contend that America's still moving in a positive light? a positive forward, still being the example to the
I
rest of
think
the world.
there are people that are working to in a positive way. They're trying, and I think as long as they continue to try, maybe the other ones will be swayed over.
And now getting back to a personal note on you, who is your greatest role model through your life? Looking back at it all.
Stan Musial, baseball player. No, I don't know. I never had really a role model. I would say I believed in Jesus Christ, and I believe in God, and I try to follow that path.
And if you could impart wisdom for future generations, for the rest of the world, for times like this in 100 years, what would you say? What would your advice be to future generations?
Learn to live with one another. Learn to respect each other. That's the main thing, regardless of what color, what religion we belong, or what political party we are. Respect that person for what they believe.
All right. Well, that was great. Thank you, Mr. Plaster.